Hey everyone, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling and very happy to have my guest here with me today. It's the first time he's been on the show, and we have much in common as far as favorite bands, I think. And you may know him as a radio presenter on the Classic Rock Hub on Fab Radio International. He's also been a DJ for the official Queen convention, which I need to know more about that. He also contributes to the website We Are Cult, and he is one of the writers of this nifty little book right here, In the Lap of the Gods, a Queen and Freddie Mercury anthology. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. David Geldard to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Hello, Dave.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure to talk to a fellow Queen fan, and I have to say that I saw this posted a lot on my Instagram feed. I would keep seeing this cool looking little book with this excellent, I couldn't resist the cover. It's got this classic 70s, early 80s Marvel Comics look to it. And I'd like to find out more about where that idea came from. But yes, you are one of the writers of this book. And if anyone reads the book, they're going to know your full history as a Queen fan. And I don't want to give that away. But what I would like to know is how this book uh, came about.
Well, it's got its roots really in a website called We Are Cult that was put together by Jay Gent. And We Are Cult's like a online magazine. You can go on there and read all the stuff that's on there. I think it's fair to say that the majority of writers had the roots in sort of Doctor Who fandom when it started. But they obviously had interest in other aspects of the arts. A lot of us were David Bowie fans, are David Bowie fans, I should say rather. And when David Bowie passed, Jay came up with the idea to do a book called Me and the Starman, which was all fan essays about what David Bowie meant to them. And then Jay set that book up so all the profits went to cancer research in memory of David Bowie. Now, somewhere down the line, Jay said to me, you'd be the perfect person to put together a Queen version of this. So I thought about it. I thought, yeah, fantastic. I'd love to do that. And Jay's kind of the publishing side of it because I know nothing about publishing books. I just kind of put the essays together and did some of the interviews and wrote pieces myself. And Jay set up the publishing and sorted out that the profits from this will go to the Mercury Phoenix Trust in memory of Freddie. We don't get a penny of it. And Jay sorted out the artwork through a friend of his called Jim Sangster. He's the guy who's done the Marvel type artwork. And I've got to admit, I absolutely love it. I was floored when I saw it. Jim works in Doctor Who media. He's done quite a lot of the covers for audio dramas and some of the books. He appears on the DVDs, on the documentaries. Very talented guy. I don't know him that well. I'm friends with him on social media. I've not spoke to him, but I love his artwork. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, anybody that grew up reading Marvel Comics, this is instantly recognizable the way it goes across the top, and you get the little picture there, and but the only thing missing would be a barcode down here in the
Yeah.
corner. But yeah, this is a really fun collection, and like you said, of really fan accounts, and in some cases, musicians that all have to do with Queen, Freddie Mercury. And what I find really fascinating about this is that you've got all age groups represented here. You've got people from all over the world. And I think that that kind of speaks to how much of an international phenomenon Queen was at different points, right? At different points in timeline. I mean, everybody's timeline is different. I mean, my history with Queen really goes back to when I was 6 years old in 1980. I think you and I are both the same age. And Another One Bites the Dust was all over the radio. I had a cousin that had the single, the 45. I would play that single and I'd flip it over and play Don't Try Suicide. And, that was one of the first, probably, I'm going to say, popular songs that I discovered on my own. It wasn't a Sesame Street record or it wasn't a Disney record. It was a contemporary hit song. And they kind of fell off my radar after that until early 92. Now, the timeline here is very interesting because, yes, early 92 is when Bohemian Rhapsody featured in Wayne's World, brought the band way back into North America, brought them back onto the North American radar. Of course, the Freddie Mercury Concert for Life. But for me, it was right around that same time that I was really starting to get into a lot of classic 70s rock bands because I was not a fan of grunge. I was more Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and Whitesnake, and I'm
Me
still really
too.
like that. So instead of looking around and saying, what can I listen to, I went backwards. I thought, who are these bands that I like, always talking about? And of course, you had Def Leppard and Extreme and Metallica all talking about how much they loved Queen. And I wasn't really understanding that, but that's because I wasn't hearing the right songs. I hadn't heard the right songs because when I thought of Queen, I thought of Another One Bites the Dust. I thought of Radio Gaga. I thought of, a kind of magic. And I'm like, all these hard rock bands like Queen. That's it. So, um, a friend of mine, his dad had a bunch of old rock records, and I remember being over at this house and hearing A Night at the Opera. So this is early 92. I'm hearing A Night at the Opera for the first time. And in four songs, it's like I got four different bands. It's incredible. I mean, anybody who knows that album knows what I'm talking about. The diversity was like Death on Two Legs was really heavy, and then Blazing on a Sunday Afternoon was like a 20s film, silent film soundtrack. I'm in Love with My Car is this heavy sort of psychedelic song, and I thought, boy, Freddie sounds different on this one. I didn't know. I didn't know anybody else sang in the band at the time. I know that might sound funny. And then You're My Best Friend was this like smooth pop song, and I'm like, this is all the same band. Like this is incredible. And so I went and bought that album, and that just it was over, right? I drove everybody nuts with Queen that year, that summer of 92. And since then, I realize now that uh, if you were in the UK, it was a much different experience because they, past the mid 80s, and we all know why, and it's kind of a dumb reason. It's a really dumb reason, actually, but Queen couldn't get arrested in North America. But in the UK and all around the world, they were still having all these hits. So I like reading the perspective of people that got into them at different times, and that's very well represented here. Um, I guess who were some of the first people that you thought of when you thought of who am I going to feature in this book? Who's going to get a chapter in this?
Um, well, Jim Jenkins, who is Queen's official biographer, became friendly with Jim possibly about 2018, 2019. Now, he helped me with I did some Queen themed fundraisers for some charities. One of them was the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital, where my nephew was for a year. And I wanted to do something to sort of pay them back, if you like, raise some money for this kids' ward so they could perhaps buy some entertainment for the kids. And I asked Jim, I said, would you help me with this? And he was right on board straight away. Such a lovely guy, and I got to know him really well. And if you want to know anything about Queen, you ask Jim. I'm sure the band asked Jim because he's known the band since the early 70s and he's like a walking encyclopedia, as well as being a really nice guy. He was very generous with his time. And if you want to know about any aspect of their career, he's the man to ask. So I definitely wanted to get Jim on board. And because he's done with Jackie Smith the official autobiography as it began, I didn't want to necessarily repeat things that are in there. So I thought, what kind of angle could we come at? And I thought, well, what would I want to know? And I'd love to hear from Jim. He's obviously seen them since the early 70s, right up until the end. What would your top 5 gigs be that Queen played? So he's put that in the book, and I just love listening. I love listening to Jim go on about, I could sit there all day listening to him about his recollections of Queen, the gigs, his meetings with the band, all his involvement over the years. He's just a really great guy. So definitely wanted Jim on board. Um, there was an amazing sort of 6 degrees of separation moment where I found out I was sort of loosely connected to Peter Straker, Freddie's friend. Um, Peter Straker, I interviewed for We Are Cults because he was re-releasing his albums as a box set. He's a really lovely guy, and I found out that his niece was best friends with my old school friend from primary school, Alison. They were really good friends and knew each other really well, and I thought that is just a bizarre connection.
Yeah.
So I'd interviewed Peter Straker, and I've done some things to sort of help promote Peter's stuff as well. And again, he's another great guy. And this is the thing about Queen: the people that they surrounded themselves with, they're all really nice people. He had a good radar for personalities. And then there was my best friend John. Um, who I've known since the 70s, since we were both in short trousers at primary school. And it got to about the age of, it was about 14, 15. And we'd gone to different secondary schools, different high schools. And one day he was shouting across the field, Dave, who do you think's better, Queen or Michael Jackson? I was like, are you mad? It's Queen. Of course it's Queen. So we come together and got talking. And he was like, do you have this video? And I was like, have you got this one? And we started trading. And that in itself, I mean, that will speak to a lot of people who watch your channel who grew up in that age before the internet, how you traded music, how you found music by accident, discovering bootlegs, discovering rarities. And it was that kind of teenage years where you spend lots of time in each other's bedroom listening to records, going to record fairs, record shops. And then I went to the tribute concert with John and a lot of the solo gigs and things like that. So he's been on that same journey with me all the time. And there was another lady, I'm sorry for asking me this now, a lady called Denise in Bolton, near Manchester. And in the 90s, just after Freddie died, she did these amazing parties. There were fundraising parties, raising funds for HIV/AIDS in memory of Freddie. And there were Queen parties with just Queen music, and they had tribute bands in the very early days of tribute bands, but also Queen discos with uh, video systems, and they would have a record stall. And each party was named after a Queen song. So they had like Seaside Rendezvous, they had Scandal, and people would dress up, and they were like a sort of lower budget of these famous parties that Freddie had.
Yeah.
They were amazing. So I had to get in touch with Denise and I had to get her involved in the book because what she did is extraordinary. You need to read the book, but amazing.
Yeah, all of these story. I'm totally picturing it. It sounds very much like, oddly enough, a good friend of mine who's also named John. We'd been friends since the late 80s, since we were 13, 14 years old, and our bond was always music. Now we bonded over Van Halen initially, but yeah, I mean, it's really something. And you're absolutely right. Before the internet, it was before the internet, and before you could drive, before you had a license, before you had a job where you had a lot of disposable income, you just couldn't go out and know everything that had come out by any band. Um, and there was something you felt like you'd accomplished something when you found something that you'd never heard of before, uh, something that you didn't know about. Like for instance, I remember being very excited. This would have been around 94 when I went into a record store, and I can only guess someone must have ordered it as an import and didn't pick it up because it was just in the regular rack, but they had Queen at the Beat, which I'd heard of, but I'd never seen. And I was like, oh, and I picked that up right away. I mean, I'd heard all the songs on it, but I hadn't heard those versions of it. And again, like we were talking before we started filming, that just got me listening to a whole bunch of Queen again. It doesn't
Yeah.
take much to get me started. And when I started listening to them, that was when it was really hard to find anything besides the Hollywood Records remasters. But I happened to find an original Capitol CD of the works. So I bought that instead of the Hollywood issue. So then I found the Radio Gaga single and flipped it over and I said, I go crazy. What's this? So it was like a new Queen song to me. those are the kind of things I remember pre-internet. Like it was just fun little things. You had no idea what was out there. And when you did find it, it was like such an accomplishment. Uh,
Magical.
finding a copy of Live Magic, which never came out in the States until 1996. But the funny thing is, and I mean, as a big Queen fan, you probably know this, it did come out in Canada, which is odd because usually by international bands, Canadian releases were just whatever they put out in the States, but Capitol in Canada, for some reason, put Live Magic out way back then. So that was something else to look for. But I feel such kinship with a lot of the people telling these stories because and when I read your story and John's story, I can feel the excitement. I can feel the excitement of finding things. And not just that, but finding people that also like the band, because I also know what it's like to feel like you're the only fan of someone and nobody else seems to get it. And and I think it was, I think it might have been your chapter when you talked about people saying, "Oh, well, are they even still around anymore?" This would have been 87, 88 when they didn't have an album out. Um, because that was 3 years was a long time in between albums
Yeah,
back
yeah,
then. I
yeah.
mean, not everybody could be Def Leppard.
Okay.
And one of the chapters I really enjoyed reading was the chapter, and I think you interviewed him with Tim Staffel
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Smile, because like a lot of us, I picked up the CD called Queen in Nuce, I think is how you pronounce it,
yeah.
and it's got the Smile recordings and it's got the two recordings Freddie did as Larry LaRue. I really liked Tim's track by track uh, run through each of those songs because I remember seeing that and going, "What are these songs?" Um, when did you first? I guess let's go back. When did you first become aware that those recordings existed?
This goes back to Denise, who I was just telling you about, who did the big parties. At one of her parties, I mean, must be talking about 93 here, 1993. She had a stall and there was a guy selling rare Queen CDs. And I got one that had the Smile album on it. And I was aware of it, but I'd never heard of it. And I took it home and I could not believe the good quality. It pains me that that album is not available to buy now, as like a deluxe vinyl or whatever, because I think people should hear that album. It's amazing. I mean, my personal favorite on it is a track called Blag that sounds very much like a cross between Cream and Led Zeppelin. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, all those songs are wonderful. And again, Tim's one of those guys who he should have been massive because he's a massive talent and such a nice guy as well.
Yeah, and the other the other impression I've always gotten from Tim Staffel is that there's no bitterness about
Oh God, no,
why
no, no.
wasn't it, why wasn't it me that, I think he recognized that Freddie was exceptional. And but you're absolutely right. I don't know why um any of the labels Queen was associated with, whether they were EMI or Hollywood, why they didn't, take those tracks and sweeten them up and remaster them and make them sound as good as possible. Because if you like the early Queen, it's the building blocks are right there.
Yeah,
Like they're, Step on Me and Earth. So that
yeah. I mean,
also
those.
reminds me of another chapter in this book where you
Yeah,
talk to one of the bass players that came uh, before John Deacon. You want to
yeah,
tell
Doug.
the
Yeah,
folks about that?
yeah. Doug Bogie was one of the bass players before John Deacon, and he only played two gigs with Queen, and one of them was supporting Yes. So he tells this. I don't want to give too much away because
Exactly.
buy the book, read the book.
Yes.
But
Yes, absolutely, folks.
again,
Buy the book. Yeah.
Doug is such a gifted musician, such a really nice guy. And Doug's at the convention every year, and he does a lot of work there on the sound. And during the pandemic, there couldn't be a convention, obviously, because people were told to stay at home. And he did all this online stuff, like an online convention for people to watch, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. No, we don't want to give too much away of the book, but basically, if it sounds like something you're interested in, folks, and you're any level of Queen fan, yeah, you definitely want to pick this book up. Now, you talked about the 6 degrees, so you've talked to people that are very, very much in the Queen camp, like Jim Jenkins, like Peter Freestone, and the list goes on. Did you make any attempt to talk to, say, Brian or Roger, or did you just think, no, this is, you know, we're going to go with what we've got, or
Um, to be honest, I could have pushed more. What I don't know. I'm very sort of conscious of the fact that they get hassled all the time to do certain things, and I didn't want to be a pain in the arse, to be honest with you. Um, but people have asked me, would you do another one? And I think I've got a wish list of people who, if I did do another one, that I would like to interview. And of course, Brian and Roger would be on that.
would you ever want, be interested in talking to, say, Paul Rogers
Oh
or
God, yes.
yeah,
Another massive hero of mine.
yeah.
Absolutely
That's
love Free and Bad Company.
you know what? It's funny that was an interesting time period for me because Paul Rogers is one of the greatest classic rock vocalists of all time. I like Bad Company, but I wasn't crazy about the merger of them.
No,
And no, I tried, believe me, I tried. I just could not get into that album. I just it just seemed ill-fitting to me. Like when they would do All Right Now or Feel Like Making Love, it sounded good, but Paul Rogers singing Radio Gaga just didn't translate. And I mean, I'm a huge Van Halen fan. I mean, and I'm a huge fan of the Sammy Hagar era in particular. But I understand when the Paul Rogers Queen thing happened, that's when I understood, okay, maybe this is what it was like when Sammy joined Van Halen. People might like Sammy on his own and like Van Halen, but didn't like him together. I think I get it now. Was this what it was like? It was like, yeah, hey, I like all the individual parts. I just didn't, and it didn't last. And I think Adam Lambert's a much better fit. I always thought in the 90s that they should have gotten Gary Sharon if they were gonna.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought, that, and when
I thought
Extreme
that,
came
yeah.
out and did that medley, that was just
It's
amazing
perfect.
good. And yeah, oddly enough, I think Gary Sharon would have been a much better, we're 6 degrees here. He would have been a much better fit for Queen than he was for Van Halen, which was
Yeah,
around the
yeah.
same time as the Paul Rogers thing was happening. It's just really weird how that happens. And of
Just on
course,
an aside there, sorry about Van Halen. Um, I possibly saw, I think, their two last gigs in the UK back in '95. They were supporting Bon Jovi, believe it or not,
yeah.
and they played at Wembley Stadium. And the other place I saw them was Sheffield, Don Valley. And I'm just really glad that I went to two on that tour because it was the last time they ever appeared. But I mean, what an awesome talent they were. I mean, not just Eddie, but all of them.
Yeah, and of course, you've got the Queen connection because of Starfleet.
Yeah, Starfleet, yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't, it's funny going down all those different rabbit holes of who played on who's, people talk about Billy Squire and, the stuff that Mac produced. And I mean, I could talk for days about Queen. As a matter of fact, if you do a volume two,
I'll
I
get
know
you
a
on. I'll get you
I
on,
know a
Tim. How about
YouTuber I know a YouTuber in Eastern Canada that would love to be part of it, talk about his fandom with Queen. But yes, in the lap of the gods, I will post a link to order this below. This I looked in the back. This is exactly like all the books I've put out, manufactured by Amazon. And but this, I'm not as generous as Dave and Jay. I don't have a charity of mine, although that gives me a few ideas. But yes, this book, all the proceeds go towards the Mercury Phoenix Trust for AIDS research. And yeah, if you're a Queen fan, you will love this book. I mean, look at this cover. If not, and it's an easy read. It just makes you, it just reminds you why you became a fan of this band in the first place, because every one of these interviews, people's appreciation for what Queen did, it just comes through. So, uh, Dave,
It's the thing.
thanks
I
for
didn't want to make it so that it was any way disrespectful to any of the band members or the collaborators or the fans themselves. It's a celebration of the music, first and foremost.
Yes, absolutely. There are stories of people meeting the guys in the band, and there's no dirt here. This is all about fans and loving the band, and and I think we all of us. I remember, right before I'd gotten into Queen, when Freddie passed away, I remember thinking, "Wow, that's really strange," because it really was the first time that um, Well, that year actually was a bad one because the year started off with Steve Clark from Def Leppard dying. That was the first time that someone in a band that I was actively listening to died, and it's like, wow, these guys are human, right? You know, they're not immortal. Um, and you know, when Freddie died, it was like that's just so weird. He's just one of those guys that you figured was always going to be around. But in some ways, and this has been touched upon many times, and people talk about it in this book, their music is more popular now than it's ever been.
Definitely, definitely.
And
I mean,
I can't
particularly,
see a time when you'll ever go to a sporting event and you won't hear "We Will Rock You" or "We Are the Champions" or "Another One Bites the Dust." You know, it's they've cemented that. Like most groups are lucky enough to have that one magical song that I say transcends rock and goes into pop culture. And I'm talking about like Survivor, Eye of the Tiger, or Europe, The Final Countdown. Queen have a handful of those songs that transcend, whereas people that don't even listen to music know these songs.
definitely, and I think, you're part of the same world as I am, a big vinyl collector, and you're going on YouTube, looking at the vinyl community and Instagram. And the great thing is that there are loads of young people now who are really into Queen, they're into Bowie, they're into Def Leppard, they're into Led Zeppelin, they're into all these classic bands. I mean, you see some of the young ladies on Instagram, they're dressing like Stevie Nicks, and they've got the room
Yep.
like a
Yep.
1970s room. And this music in many ways is more loved now than it was back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to say, both of my kids got into Queen way early. They both got Queen albums in their collections and a lot of the other classic rock bands too. But yeah, Queen are such, I mean, that's something, my whole family, my wife and kids and I, we all went, I've taken them to see the Queen Extravaganza. That's the closest I've ever come to seeing Queen. I saw them with Mark Martel, and then I saw them, and his name escapes me now. I can't
F.
think of
Scott
his name.
Soto.
No, no, not
Hmm?
Jeff, but I saw them 7 years ago, and I didn't know until right before the gig that it wasn't Mark Martel. Um,
Right.
he, I don't know if he's Brazilian. Uh, Great singer. Didn't sound anything like Freddie, but he was a good entertainer. Mark Martel was eerily
It's
like
uncanny, isn't it?
yeah. And I remember that first show in 2013. I also had the pleasure of interviewing Tyler Warren, who was drumming for them at the time and eventually ended up drumming for the actual band, which is pretty cool. I haven't talked to him in a long, long time, but that was kind of a highlight. But yeah, get the book, folks. In the Lap of the Gods, Jay Gent and David Geldard, and David is my guest today on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. And Dave, where can people find you if they want to if they want to tune in, listen to what you do as a DJ and listen to what you do on the Classic Rock Hub?
Well, yeah, the Classic Rock Club's got a Facebook page, or you can contact me via Facebook, or contact the station, Fab Radio International. And Fab Radio International is great because these days a lot of big companies own radio stations, and they are, they search the algorithms, and it's all computerized and this, that, and the other. Fab Radio International is old school. It's people who pick the music every week for my show. I pick the music myself. I can play B-sides if I want. No one's on my back telling me what to play. I'm giving, you know, and they cover a lot of different types of music. They cover um, sci-fi and entertainment. They are merged with a magazine called Starburst magazine, which is world famous, one of the longest running magazines of cult entertainment. And they've got the Starburst magazine show on Fab Radio International, and they have a political show, the Mancunian Candidates, where again it's they let the presenters have their own views, and everything is very, very human, which is the opposite of the way radio is generally going these days. And for Queen fans, I always cover the convention as well every year. I always do a radio show on the convention and
Awesome.
interview some of the people involved with Queen.
That's so cool. So yes, folks, yes, all things Queen in the Lap of the Gods, a Queen and Freddie Mercury anthology. Pick it up. All proceeds go to the Mercury Phoenix Trust. I'll have the link to purchase below. Dave, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you, sir. It's
We
been an
will
absolute pleasure.
next time we want to talk Queen or Def Leppard or some other band, you might see Dave again. Chances are pretty good of that. So
Oh,
uh,
I'm anytime. I'll come on.
so anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Get the book and go listen to some Queen. We'll talk to you later.